Chapter in the Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 5. Diagon Alley. Harry woke early the next morning. Although he could tell it was daylight, he kept his eyes tight shut. It was a dream, he told himself firmly. I dreamed a giant was called Hagrid came to tell me I was going to a school for wizards. When I open my eyes, I'll be home in my cupboard. There was suddenly a loud tapping noise, and there's Aunt Petunia knocking on the door. Harry thought, his heart sinking. But he still didn't open his eyes. It had been such a good dream. Tap, tap, tap. All right, Harry mumbled. I'm getting up. He sat up, and Hagrid's heavy coat fell off him. The hut was full of sunlight. The storm was over. Hagrid himself was asleep on the collapsed sofa, and there was an owl rapping its claw on the window, a newspaper held in its beak. Harry scrambled to his feet, so happy he felt as though a large balloon was swelling inside him. He went straight to the window and jerked it open. The owl swooped in and dropped the newspaper on top of Hagrid, who didn't wake up. The owl then fluttered onto the floor and began to attack Hagrid's coat. Don't do that! Harry tried to wave the owl out of the way, but it snapped its beak fiercely at him and carried on savaging the coat. Hagrid, said Harry loudly, there's an owl. Pay him. Hagrid grunted into the sofa. What? He wants paying for delivering the paper. Look in the pockets. Hagrid's coat seemed to be made of nothing but pockets. Bunches of keys, slug pellets, balls of string, mint humbugs, tea bags. Finally, Harry pulled out a handful of strange-looking coins. Give him 5 nuts, said Hagrid sleepily. Nuts? The little bronze ones. Harry counted out 5 little bronze coins, and the owl held out its leg so he could put the money in a small leather pouch tied onto it. Then it flew out the window. Hagrid yawned loudly, sat up and stretched. Best be off, Harry. Lots to do today. Got to get up to London and buy all your stuff for school. Harry was turning over the wizard coins, looking at them. He thought of something which made him feel as though a happy balloon inside him had just got a puncture. Hagrid. Said Hagrid, who was pulling on his huge boots. I haven't got any money. And you heard Uncle Vernon last night. He won't pay for me to go and learn magic. Don't worry about that, said Hagrid, standing up and scratching his head. Don't think your parents didn't leave you anything. But if their house was destroyed, they didn't keep their gold in the house, boy. Nah, first stop for us, Gringotts, Wizard's Bank. Have a sausage. They're not bad cold, and I wouldn't say no to a bit of birthday cake neither. Wizards have banks? Just the one, Gringotts, run by goblins. Harry dropped the bit of sausage he was holding. Goblins? Yeah, so you'd be mad to try and rob it, I'll tell you. Never mess with goblins, Harry. Gringotts is the safest place in the world for anything you want to keep safe. Except maybe Hogwarts. As a matter of fact, I got visit Gringotts anyway, for Dumbledore. Hogwarts business. Hagrid drew himself up proudly. Usually gets me to do important stuff for him. Fetching, getting things from Gringotts. He knows he can trust me, see? Got everything then? Come on. Harry followed Hagrid out onto the rock. The sky was quite clear now, and the sea gleamed in the sunlight. The boat Uncle Vernon had hired was still there, with a lot of water in the bottom after the storm. How did you get here? Harry asked, looking around for another boat. Flew, said Hagrid. Flew? Yeah, but we got to go back on this. Not supposed to use magic now I got you. They settled down in the boat, Harry still staring at Hagrid, trying to imagine him flying. It seems a shame to row, though, said Hagrid, giving Harry another one of his sideways glances. If I was to, speed things up a bit, you wouldn't mind not mentioning it at Hogwarts. Of course not, said Harry, eager to see more magic. Hagrid pulled out the pink umbrella again, tapped it twice on the side of the boat. They sped off towards land. Why would you be mad trying to rob Gringotts? Harry asked. Spells, enchantments, said Hagrid, unfolding his newspaper as they spoke. They say there's dragons guarding the high-security vaults. And then they got to find your way, Gringotts. Gringotts is hundreds of miles under London Sea, deep under the underground. You'd die of hunger trying to get out, even if you managed to get your hands on something. Harry sat down and thought about this while Hagrid read his newspaper, The Daily Prophet. Harry had learnt from Uncle Vernon that people liked to be left alone while they did this, but it was very difficult. He'd never had so many questions in his life. Ministry of Magic messing up things as usual. Hagrid muttered, turning the page. There's a Ministry of Magic? Harry asked before he could stop himself. Course, said Hagrid. They wanted Dumbledore for minister, but he'd never leave Hogwarts, so old Cornelius Fudge got the job. Blunger if he was one. So he pelts Dumbledore with owls every morning, asking for advice. But what does the Ministry of Magic do? Well, their main job is to keep the Muggles that's there, still witches and wizards up and down the country. Why? Why? Blimey, Harry, everyone would be wanting magic solutions to their problems. Now we're best left alone. At this moment, the boat bumped gently onto the harbour wall. Hagrid folded up his newspaper, and they gently clambered up the stone steps onto the street. Passers-by stared a lot at Hagrid as they walked through the little town to the station. Harry couldn't blame them. Not only was Hagrid twice as tall as anyone, he kept pointing at perfectly ordinary things, like parking meters, saying loudly, "See that, Harry? These muggles dream up, eh?" "Hagrid," said Harry, panting a bit as he ran to keep up. "Did you say there were dragons at Gringotts?" "Well, so they say," said Hagrid. "Crikey, I'd like a dragon." "You'd like one?" "Wanted one ever since I was a kid. Here we go." They'd reached the station. There was a train to London in 5 minutes' time. Hagrid, who didn't understand Muggle money, as it was called, gave the notes to Harry so he could buy their tickets. People stared more than ever on the train. Hagrid took up 2 seats and sat knitting what looked like a canary yellow circus tent. "Still got your letter, Harry?" he asked as he counted stitches. Harry took the parchment envelope out of his pocket. "Good," said Hagrid. "There's a list of everything you need." Harry unfolded the second piece of paper he hadn't noticed the night before and read. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Uniform. First-year students will require 3 sets of plain work robes, black. One plain pointed hat, black, for day wear. 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon's hide or similar. 1 winter cloak, black, silver fastenings. Please note that all pupils' clothes should carry name tags. Set books. All students should have a copy of each of the following. Standard Book of Spells by Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. Magical Theory by Alberta Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Philia Spore. Magical Drafts and Potions by Arsenis Jigger. Fantastic Beasts of Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment. 1 wand, 1 cauldron, pewter standard size 2, 1 set glass or crystal files, 1 telescope, 1 set brass scales. Students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are reminded that first years are not allowed their own broomsticks. "Can we buy all this in London?" Harry wondered aloud. "If you know where to go," said Hagrid. Harry had never been to London before. Although Hagrid seemed to know where he was going, he was obviously not used to getting there in a normal way. He got stuck in the ticket barrier on the Underground and complained so loudly that the seats were too small and the trains too slow. "I don't know how the Muggles managed without magic," he said, as they climbed a broken-down escalator which led up to a bustling road lined with shops. Hagrid was so huge he parted the crowd easily. All Harry had to do was keep close behind them. They passed bookshops and music stores, burger bars and cinemas, but nowhere that looked as if it could sell you a magic wand. It was just an ordinary street full of ordinary people. Could there really be piles of wizard gold buried miles beneath them? Were there really shops that sold spell books and broomsticks? Might this not be some huge joke that the Dursleys had cooked up? If Harry hadn't known that the Dursleys had no sense of humour, he might have thought so. Yet somehow, even though everything Hagrid had told him so far was unbelievable, Harry couldn't help trusting him. "This is it," said Hagrid, coming to a halt. "The Leaky Cauldron. It's a famous place." It was a tiny, grubby-looking pub. If Hagrid hadn't pointed it out, Harry wouldn't have noticed it was there. The people hurrying by didn't glance at it. Their eyes slid from the big bookshop on one side to the record shop on the other, as if they couldn't see the Leaky Cauldron at all. In fact, Harry had the most peculiar feeling that only he and Hagrid could see it. Before he could mention this, Hagrid steered him inside. For a famous place, it was very dark and shabby. A few old women were sitting in a corner, drinking tiny glasses of sherry. One of them was smoking a long pipe. A little man in a top hat was talking to the old barman, who was quite bald and looked like a gummy walnut. The low buzz of chatter stopped when they walked in. Everyone seemed to know Hagrid. They waved and smiled at him. The barman reached for a glass, saying, "The usual, Hagrid." "Can't, Tom. I'm on Hogwarts business," said Hagrid, clapping his great hand on Harry's shoulder and making Harry's knees buckle. "Good Lord," said the barman, peering at Harry. Can it be?" The leaky cauldron had suddenly gone completely still and silent. "Bless my soul," said the old barman. "Harry Potter, what an honour." He hurried out from behind the bar, rushed towards Harry and seized his hand, tears in his eyes. "Welcome back, Mr. Potter, welcome back." Harry didn't know what to say. Everyone was looking at him. The old woman with the pipe was puffing on it without realizing it had gone out. Hagrid was beaming. There was a great scraping of chairs, and the next moment Harry found himself shaking hands with everybody in the leaky cauldron. "Doris Crockford, Mr. Potter. Can't believe I'm meeting you." "So proud, Mr. Potter. I'm just so proud." "Always wanted to shake your hand. I'm all of a flutter." "Delighted, Mr. Potter. Can't tell you. Diggle's the name. Daedalus Diggle." "I've seen you before," said Harry, as Daedalus Diggle's top hat fell off in excitement. "You bowed to me once in a shop." "He remembers," cried Daedalus Diggle, looking around at everybody. "Did you hear that? He remembers me." Harry shook hands again and again. Doris Crockford kept coming back for more. A pale young man made his way forward very nervously, his eyes twitching. "Professor Quirrell," said Hagrid. "Harry, Professor Quirrell will be one of your teachers at Hogwarts." "Potter," stammered Professor Quirrell, grasping Harry's hand. "Can't tell you how pleased I am to meet you." "What sort of magic do you teach, Professor Quirrell?" Defense against the dark arts," muttered Professor Quirrell, as though he'd rather not think about it. "No, not when you need a Potter." He laughed nervously. "You'll be getting all your equipment, I suppose. I've got to pick up a new book on vampires myself." He looked terrified at the very thought. But others wouldn't let Professor Quirrell keep Harry to himself. It took almost 10 minutes to get away from them all. At last, Hagrid managed to make himself heard over the babble. "Must get on. Lots to buy. Come on, Harry." Doris Crockford shook Harry's hand one last time, and Hagrid led them through the bar out into a small walled courtyard, and there was nothing but a dustbin and a few reeds. Hagrid grinned at Harry. "Told you, didn't I? Told you're famous. Even Professor Quirrell was trembling to meet you. Mind you, he's usually trembling." "Is he always that nervous?" "Oh yeah, poor bloke. Brilliant mind. He was fine while he was studying out of books, but then he took a year off to get some first-hand experience. They say he met vampires in the Black Forest, and there was some nasty bit of trouble with a hag. Never been the same again. Scared of the students, scared of his own subject. Now, where's my umbrella? Vampires, hags." Harry's head was swimming. Hagrid, meanwhile, was counting bricks on the wall above the dustbin. "3 up, 2 across," he muttered. "Right, stand back, Harry." He tapped the wall 3 times with the point of his umbrella. The brick he had touched quivered. It wriggled. In the middle, a small hole appeared. It grew wider and wider. A second later, they were facing a large archway, even big enough for Hagrid. An archway onto a cobbled street which twisted and turned out of sight. "Welcome," said Hagrid, "to Diagon Alley." He grinned at Harry's amazement. They stepped through the archway. Harry looked quickly over his shoulder and saw the archway shrinking instantly back to a solid wall. The sun shone brightly on a stack of cauldrons outside the nearest shop. Cauldrons, all sizes, copper, brass, pewter, silver, self-stirring, collapsible, said a sign hanging over them. "Yeah, you'll be needing one," said Hagrid, "but you got to get your money first." Harry wished he had about 8 more eyes. He turned his head in every direction as they walked up the street, trying to look at everything at once. The shops, the things outside them, the people doing their shopping. A plump woman walked past an apothecary's was shaking her head as they passed. "Dragon liver, 16 sickles an ounce. They're mad." A low, soft tooting came from a dark shop with a sign saying, "Aelops Owl Emporium, Tawny Street, Brown and Snowy." Several boys of about Harry's age had their noses pressed against a window with broomsticks in it. "Look," Harry heard one of them say, "the new Nimbus 2000, fast as ever." There were shops selling robes, shops selling telescopes, a strange silver instruments Harry had never seen before. Windows stacked with piles of bat spleens and eel's eyes, tottering piles of spell books, quills, and rolls of parchment, potion bottles, globes of the moon. Gringotts, said Hagrid. They had reached a snowy white building which towered over the other little shops. Standing beside its burnished bronze doors, wearing a uniform of scarlet and gold, was, yeah, that's a goblin, said Hagrid quietly as they walked up the white stone stairs towards him. The goblin was about a head shorter than Harry. He had a swarthy, clever face, a pointed beard, and, Harry noticed, very long fingers and feet. He bowed as they walked inside. Now they were facing a second pair of doors, silver this time, with words engraved on them. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what waits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned. Beware of finding more than treasure there. Like I said, you'd be mad trying to rob it, said Hagrid. A pair of goblins bowed them through the silver doors, and they were in a vast marble hall. About 100 more goblins were sitting on high stools behind a long counter, scribbling in large ledgers, weighing coins on brass scales, examining precious stones through eyeglasses. There were too many doors to count leading off the hall. And yet more goblins were showing people in and out of these. Hagrid and Harry made for the counter. Morning, said Hagrid to a free goblin. We've come to take out some money out of Mr. Potter's safe. You have his key, sir? Got it somewhere, said Hagrid. He started emptying his pockets onto the counter, scattering a handful of mouldy dog biscuits over the goblin's book of numbers. The goblin wrinkled his nose. Harry watched the goblin on their right weighing a pile of rubies as big as glowing coals. Got it, said Hagrid at last, holding up a tiny golden key. The goblin looked at it closely. That seems to be in order. And I've also got a letter here from Professor Dumbledore, said Hagrid importantly, throwing out his chest. It's about the you-know-what in Vault 713. The goblin read the letter carefully. Very well, he said, handing it back to Hagrid. I will have someone take you down to both vaults. Griphook was yet another goblin. Once Hagrid had crammed all the dog biscuits back inside his pockets, he and Harry followed Griphook towards one of the doors leading off the hall. What's you-know-what in Vault 713? Harry asked. Can't tell you that, said Hagrid mysteriously. Very secret, Hogwarts business. Dumbledore's trusted me. More than my job's worth telling you that. Griphook held the door for them. Harry, who'd expected more marble, was surprised. They were in a narrow stone passageway lit with flaming torches. It sloped steeply downwards, and there were little railway tracks on the floor. Griphook whistled, and a small cart came hurtling along the tracks towards them. They climbed in, Hagrid with some difficulty, and were off. At first they just hurtled through a maze of twisting passages. Harry tried to remember left, right, left, middle fork, right, left, but it was impossible. The rattling cart seemed to know its own way, because Griphook wasn't steering. Harry's eyes stung in the cold air as the cold air brushed past them, but he kept them wide open. Once he thought he saw a burst of fire at the end of a passage, and twisted around to see if it was a dragon, but too late. They plunged even deeper, passing an underground lake, where huge stalactites and stalagmites grew from the ceiling and floor. I never know, Harry called to Hagrid over the noise of the cart. What's the difference between a stalagmite and a stalactite? Stalagmite's got an M in it, said Hagrid. And don't ask me questions just now. I think I'm going to be sick. He did look very green, and when the cart stopped at last beside the small door on the passage wall, Hagrid got out and had to lean against the wall to stop his knees trembling. Griphook unlocked the door. A lot of green smoke came billowing out. As it cleared, Harry gasped. There were mounds of gold coins, columns of silver, and heaps of little brown nuts. All yours, smiled Hagrid. All Harry's. It was incredible. The Dursleys couldn't have known about this, or they'd have had it from him much faster than blinking. How often had they complained how much Harry cost to keep them? All this time there was There had been a small fortune belonging to him deep under London. Hagrid, excuse me, sorry. Hagrid helped Harry pile some of it into a bag. The gold ones are galleons, he explained. 17 silver sickles to a galleon, 29 nuts to a sickle. It's easy enough. Right, that should be enough for a couple terms. We'll keep the rest safe for you. He turned to Griphook. Vault 713, please. Can we go more slowly? One speed only, said Griphook. They were going even deeper now and gathering speed. The air became colder and colder as they hurtled around tight corners. They went rattling over an underground ravine, and Harry leant over the side to try and see what was at the bottom, but Hagrid groaned and pulled him back by the scruff of his neck. Vault 713 had no keyhole. Stand back, said Griphook importantly. He struck the door gently with one of his long fingers, and it simply melted away. If anyone but a Gringotts goblin tried that, they'd be sucked through the door and trapped in there, said Griphook. How often do you check to see if anyone's inside? Harry asked. About once every 10 years, said Griphook, with a rather nasty grin. Something really extraordinary had to be inside this top security vault, Harry was sure. He leaned forward eagerly, expecting to see fabulous jewels at the very least. But at first he thought it was empty. Then he noticed a grubby little package wrapped up in brown paper on the floor. Hagrid picked it up and tucked it deep inside his coat. Harry longed to know what was in it, but knew better than to ask. Come on, back on this infernal cart, and don't talk to me on the way back. It's best if I keep my mouth shut, said Hagrid. One wild cart ride later, they stood blinking in the sunlight outside Gringotts. Harry didn't know where to run first now that he had a bag full of money. He didn't know how many galleons there were to a pound to know if he was holding more money than he'd had in his whole life. More money than even Dudley had ever had. Might as well get your uniform, said Hagrid, nodding towards Madam Malkin's robes for all occasion. Listen, Harry, would you mind if I slipped off for a pick-me-up at Loki Cauldron? I hate them Gringotts carts. He still did look a bit sick, so Harry entered Madam Malkin's shop alone, feeling nervous. Madam Malkin was a squat, smiling witch dressed in mauve. Hogwarts, dear, she said when Harry started to speak. Got a lot here. Another young man just being fitted right now, in fact. In the back of the shop, a boy with pale, pointed face was standing on a footstool, while a second witch pinned up his long black robes. Madam Malkin stood Harry on a stool next to him, slipped a long robe over his head, and began to pin it to the right length. Hello, said the boy. Hogwarts too? Yes, said Harry. My father's next door buying my books, and my mother's up the street looking at one, said the boy. He had a bored, drooling voice. Then I'm going to drag them off to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully my father into getting me one, and I'll smuggle it in somehow. Harry was strongly reminded of Dudley. Have you got your own broom? The boy went on. No, said Harry. Play Quidditch at all? No, said Harry again, wondering what on earth Quidditch was. I do. My father says it's a crime if I'm not picked to play for my house. And I must say, I agree. Know what house you'll be in yet? No, said Harry, feeling more stupid by the minute. Well, no one really knows what they'll get, but do they? But I know I've been being Slytherin. All our family have been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I'd leave, wouldn't you? Said Harry, wishing he had something to say a bit more interesting. I say, look at the man, said the boy suddenly, nodding towards the front window. Hagrid was standing there, grinning at Harry, pointing at 2 large ice creams to show he couldn't come in. That's Hagrid, said Harry, pleased to know something that the boy didn't. He works at Hogwarts. Oh, said the boy. I've heard of him. He's sort of a servant, isn't he? He's the gamekeeper, said Harry. He was liking the boy less and less every second. Yes, exactly. I heard he's sort of a savage. Lives in a hut in the school grounds. Every now and again he gets drunk, tries to do magic, and ends up setting fire to his bed. I think he's brilliant, said Harry coldly. Do you? Said the boy with a slight sneer. Why is he with you? Where are your parents? They're dead, said Harry shortly. He didn't feel much like going into the matter with the boy. Oh, sorry, said the other, not sounding sorry at all. But they were our kind, weren't they? They're a witch and wizard, if that's what you mean. I really don't think they should let the other sort in, do you? They're not just the same. They've never been brought up to know our ways. Some of them haven't even heard of Hogwarts until they got the letter. Imagine. I think they should keep it the old wizarding families. What's your name anyway? Surname anyway. But before Harry could answer, Madam Malkin said, "That's you done, my dear," and Harry, not sorry for an excuse, stopped talking to the boy and hopped down from the footstool. "Well, I'll see you at Hogwarts, I suppose," said the drawing boy. Harry was rather quiet when he ate his ice cream Hagrid had bought him. Chocolate and raspberry with chopped nuts. "What's up?" said Hagrid. "Nothing," Harry lied. They stopped to buy parchment and quills. Harry cheered up a bit when he found a bottle of ink that changed colour when he wrote. When they left the shop, he said, Hagrid, what's Quidditch?" "Blimey, Harry, I keep forgetting how little you know." "Not knowing about Quidditch. Don't make me feel worse." Said Harry. He told Hagrid about the pale boy and Madam Malkin's. And he said people from Muggle families shouldn't even be allowed in. "You're not from a Muggle family. If he'd known who you were, he'd have grown up knowing your name, if his parents were wizarding folk. You saw him in the leaky cauldron." "Anyway, what does he know about it?" "Some of the best I've ever seen were the only ones with magic in them in a long line of Muggles. Look at your mum. Look at what she had for her sister. What is Quidditch? It's our sport, wizard sport. It's like football in the Muggle world. Everybody knows Quidditch. Played up in the air on broomsticks. There's 4 balls. Sort of hard to explain the rules. What are Slytherin and Hufflepuff?" Schoolhouses. There's 4. Everybody says Hufflepuff are a lot of duffers, but I bet I'm Hufflepuff," said Harry gloomily. Better Hufflepuff than Slytherin," said Hagrid darkly. "Not a single witch or wizard who went bad wasn't from Slytherin. You know who was one. You know who was at Hogwarts? Years and years ago," said Hagrid. They bought Harry's school books in a shop called Flourish and Bots, where the shelves were stacked to the ceiling with books as large as paving stones bound in leather, books the size of postage stamps with covers of silk, books full of peculiar symbols, and a few books with nothing in them at all. Even Dudley, who had never read anything, would have gone wild to get some of his hands on these. Hagrid always had to drag Harry away from curses and counter-curses, bewitch your friend and befuddle your enemies with the latest revenges, hair loss and jelly legs, tongue-tying, and much, much more, by Professor Vindicus Viridin. "I was trying to find out how to curse Dudley. I'm not saying that's not a good idea, but you're not to use magic in the Muggle world, except in very special circumstances," said Hagrid. "And anyway, you couldn't work any of those curses yet. You'll need a lot more study before you could get to that level." Hagrid wouldn't let Harry buy a solid gold cauldron either. It says pewter on the list, but they got a nice set of scales for weighing potion ingredients and collapsible brass telescope. They visited the apothecary's, which was fascinating enough to make up for its horrible smell. A mixture of bad eggs and rotted cabbages. The barrels of slimy stuff stood on the floor. Jars of herbs, dried roots, and bright powders lined the walls. Bundles of feathers, strings of fangs, snarled claws hang from the ceiling, while Hagrid asked the man behind the counter for a supply of some basic potion ingredients for Harry. Harry himself examined silver unicorn horns at 21 gallons each, and minuscule glittery beetle eyes, 5 nuts a scoop. Outside, Hagrid checked Harry's list again. "Just your one left. Oh yeah, and I haven't got you a birthday present." Harry felt himself go red. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Tell you what, I'll get you an animal. Not a toad. Toads went out of fashion years ago. You'd be laughed at. And I don't like cats. They make me sneeze. I'll get you an owl. All the kids want owls. They're dead useful. Carry posts and everything." 20 minutes later, they left Elop's Owl Emporium, which had been dark, full of rustling and flickering, jewel-bright eyes. Harry now carried a large cage which held a beautiful snowy owl, fast asleep with her head under her wing. He couldn't stop stammering thanks, sounding just like Professor Quirrell. "Don't mention it," said Hagrid gruffly. "Don't expect you've had a lot of presents from them Dursleys. Just Ollivanders left now. Only place for one Ollivanders, and you've got the best wand. A magic wand. This is what Harry had been really looking forward to. The last shop was narrow and shabby. Peeling gold letters over the door read Ollivanders, maker of fine wands since 382 BC. A single wand lay on a faded purple cushion in the dusty window. A tinkling bell rang somewhere in the depths of the shop as they stepped inside. It was a tiny place, empty except for a single spindly chair which Hagrid sat on to wait. Harry felt strangely as though he had entered a very strict library. He swallowed a lot of new questions which just occurred to him, and looked instead at the thousands of narrow boxes piled neatly right up to the ceiling. For some reason, the back of his neck prickled. The very dust and silence in there seemed to tingle with some secret magic. "Good afternoon," said a soft voice. Harry jumped. Hagrid must have jumped too, because there was a loud crunching noise, and he got swiftly off the spindly chair. An old man was standing before them, his wide, pale eyes shining like moons through the gloom of the shop. "Hello," said Hagrid awfully. "Ah, yes," said the man. "I thought I'd be seeing you soon, Harry Potter. It wasn't a question. You have your mother's eyes. But it seems only yesterday she was in here herself buying her first wand. 10 1/4 inches long, swishy, made of willow. Nice wand for charm work." Mr. Ollivander moved closer to Harry. Harry wished he would blink. Those silvery eyes were a bit creepy. Your father, on the other hand, favoured a mahogany wand. 11 inches, pliable, a little more power and excellent for transfiguration. "Well, I say your father favoured it. It is really the one that chooses the wizard, of course." Mr. Ollivander had come so close to Harry that he and Harry were almost nose to nose. He could see himself reflected in the misty eyes. And that's where Mr. Ollivander touched the lightning scar on Harry's forehead with a long white finger. "I'm sorry to say that I sold the one that did that," he said softly. 13 1/2 inches. You, powerful wand, very powerful, in the wrong hands. Well, if I'd known what the wand was going out to the world to do." He shook his head and then, to Harry's relief, spotted Hagrid. Rubius Hagrid, how nice to see you again. Oak, 16 inches, rather bendy, wasn't it?" "It was, sir, yes," said Hagrid. "Good wand, wasn't that? I suppose they snapped it in half when you got expelled," said Mr. Ollivander, suddenly stern. "Ah, yes, they did," said Hagrid, shuffling his feet. "I've still got the pieces, though," he added brightly. "But you don't use them," said Ollivander sharply. "Oh, no, sir," said Hagrid quickly. Harry noticed he gripped his pink umbrella very tightly as he spoke. Said Mr. Ollivander, giving Hagrid a quick, piercing look. "Well now, Mr. Potter, let me see." He pulled out a long tape measure with silver markings out of his pocket. "Which is your wand arm?" Well, I'm right-handed," said Harry. "Hold out your arm, that's it." He measured Harry from shoulder to finger, then wrist to elbow, shoulder to floor, knee to armpit, and around his head. As he measured, he said, "Every Ollivander wand has a core of a very powerful magical substance, Mr. Potter. We use unicorn hairs, phoenix tail feathers, and the heartstring of dragons. No two Ollivander wands are the same, just as no two unicorns, dragons, or phoenixes are quite the same. And of course, you'll never get such good results with another wizard's wand." Harry suddenly realized that the tape measure, which was measuring between his nostrils, was doing it on his own. Mr. Ollivander was flitting around shelves, taking down boxes. "That'll do," he said. The tape measure crumpled into a heap on the floor. "Right then, Mr. Potter, try this one. Beechwood and dragon heartstring, 9 inches, nice and flexible. Just take it and give it a wave." Harry took the wand and, feeling foolish, waved it around a bit, but Ollivander snatched it out of his hands almost at once. "Maple and phoenix feather, 7 inches, quite whippy. Harry tried, but he had hardly waved the wand when 2 was snatched out of his hands by Mr. Ollivander. No. Here, ebony and unicorn hair, 8 1/2 inches, springy. Go on, try it. Try it out." Harry tried and tried. He had no idea what Ollivander was waiting for. A pile of tried wands was mounting higher and higher on the spindly chair, but the more wands Ollivander pulled from his shelves, the happier he seemed to become. "Tricky customer, eh? Not to worry, we'll find the perfect match here somewhere. I wonder. Yes, why not? Unusual combination. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and subtle." Harry took the wand. He felt a sudden warmth in his fingers. He raised the wand above his head, brought it swishing through the dusty air, and a stream of red and gold sparks shot out the end like a firework, throwing dancing spots of light onto the wall. Hagrid whooped and clapped as Mr. Ollivander cried, "Bravo! Yes, indeed! Oh, very good! Very well! How curious! How very curious!" He put Harry's wand back into the box, wrapped it in brown paper, still muttering, "Curious, curious." "Sorry," said Harry, "but what's curious?" Mr. Ollivander fixed Harry with his pale stare. "I remember every wand I ever sold, Mr. Potter. Every single wand. It just so happens that the phoenix feather whose tail feather is in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. It is very curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand, when its brother gave you that scar." Harry swallowed. "Yes, 13.5 inches. You. Curious indeed how these things happen. The one chooses a wizard. Remember, I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great." Harry shivered. He wasn't sure if he liked Mr. Ollivander too much. He paid 7 gold galleons for his wand. Mr. Ollivander bowed them from their shop. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Hagrid and Harry made their way back down Diagon Alley, back through the wall and through the leaky cauldron, now empty. Harry didn't speak at all as they walked down the road. He didn't even notice how many people were gawping at them on the underground. They didn't, as they were with funny-shaped packages, with the sleeping snowy owl on Harry's lap. Up another escalator, out onto Paddington Station. Harry could only realise where they were when Hagrid tapped him on the shoulder. "Got time for a bite to eat before your train leaves," he said. He bought Harry a hamburger and they sat down on plastic seats to eat them. Harry kept looking around. Everything looked so strange somehow. "You're all right, Harry. You weren't very quiet," said Hagrid. Harry wasn't sure how he could explain. He'd just had the best birthday of his life. He chewed his hamburger, trying to find the word. "Everyone thinks I'm special," he said at last. "Those people in the leaky cauldron. Professor Quirrell, Mr. Ollivander. But I don't know anything about magic at all. How can they expect great things? I'm famous, and I can't even remember what I'm famous for. I don't know what happened when my parents died that night." Hagrid leant across the table. Behind the wild beard and eyebrows he wore a very kind smile. "Don't you worry, Harry. You'll learn fast. Everyone starts at the beginning at Hogwarts. You'll be just fine. Just be yourself. I know it's hard. You've been singled out, and that's always hard. But you'll have a great time at Hogwarts. I do, still do, as a matter of fact." Hagrid helped Harry onto the train that would take him back to the Dursleys, then handed him an envelope. "Your ticket for Hogwarts," he said. "1st of September, King's Cross Station. It's all on your ticket. Any problems with the Dursleys, send me a letter with your owl. She'll know where to find me. See you soon, Harry." The train pulled out of the station. Harry wanted to watch Hagrid until he was out of sight. He rose in his seat and pressed his nose on the window, but blinked, and Hagrid had gone.